Episode 3, articles for the week of March 15th to 21st, 2026. Hello, my name is Welcome to the Bearer of Bad News. I'm your host, Lore Bear, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so I won't. This is your weekly recap of positive news stories from around the world. Articles included in this broadcast were originally published from March 8th to 14th, 2026. The stories in this episode are sourced from various news outlets and publications. Bearer of Bad News does not conduct independent fact-checking or verification of these stories. Listeners are encouraged to review original sources for accuracy and complete context. We are not responsible for the accuracy or content of third-party reporting, which is a fancy way of saying that I read it, I didn't report it, and here are this week's stories. Mexico's monarch butterfly population jumps 64%, offering hope for at-risk species. From theguardian.com, the population of monarch butterflies in Mexico increased 64% this winter, compared with the same period in 2025, offering a glimmer of hope for an insect considered at risk of extinction. The figures, released this week by the World Wildlife Fund Mexico, showed that the area occupied by monarchs expanded to 2.93 hectares, 7.24 acres, of forest from 1.79 hectares, 4.2 acres, the previous winter, the largest coverage since 2018. The monarch butterfly is the symbol of the trilateral relationship between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Mexican Environment Minister Alicia Bárcena Ibarra said at a news conference on Tuesday, "Its conservation is a collective commitment we must maintain for the future. Every fall, tens of millions of the butterflies travel nearly 3,000 miles from Canada, across the U.S., and finally to the forests of western Mexico. There, the orange insects cover entire trees and flutter through the air in spectacular fashion. But a combination of habitat loss from deforestation, climate crisis, and the use of herbicides has seen their numbers plummet over the last 30 years. In the U.S., the increasing use of herbicides like glyphosate and dicamba has seen the amount of milkweed, the only plant that monarch caterpillars can eat, drop considerably, with butterfly numbers also plummeting as a result. Because of this decline, the Biden administration had proposed listing the monarch as threatened under the Endangered Species Act at the end of 2024. But Trump officials have since delayed that decision indefinitely. In February, two environmental groups filed a lawsuit to compel the Trump administration to set a date for protections. One of the greatest achievements of this work is that illegal logging in the core zone of the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve has been virtually eradicated since 2008. Maria Jose Villanueva, World Wildlife Federation Mexico's director, told reporters, "This means that the forests have represent the fundamental habitat for the monarch butterfly's hibernation are being protected and conserved." On to from the BBC.com, boy is first to trial life-changing exoskeleton. A 7-year-old boy who has cerebral palsy has become the first person in the country to trial a company's bionic exoskeleton at home. Asger, from Stroud in Gloucestershire, tested the new 72,000-pound powered exoskeleton to improve his range of mobility. Parents Holly and Sam said it had been exciting to see him walk all the way to school. However, they said if they want to buy the potentially life-changing agilac orthosis made by the company Bionic Power, they would have to fundraise for it. Sam Walmsley, from the London Orthotic Consultancy, which is running the trial, said he was sure the technology would become available to the masses in the future. Cerebral palsy affects approximately 1 in 400 children in the UK, according to the NHS. It is a developmental disability that affects movement and coordination. Asger either uses a wheelchair to get about or a pushchair to walk long distances, but does not need them with the exoskeleton, which was initially developed for military use in Canada. Sam said it had been really exciting to see Asger have more independence. However, the 72,000-pound exoskeleton cost is high, Parents said £600 just to trial it for a week. If it's the right thing for him, we'll make it happen because we have to, Sam said. Holly said, disability is expensive. We couldn't really ever say no because you do anything for your children. If we did buy one, it would take something like a really big fundraiser. She said the technology would be life-changing for Asger. Sam said the constant adjustments of the exoskeleton and servicing would add to the cost. Walmsley said the parents had sought support from other suppliers and the NHS but found they couldn't quite get it right. They said they then came to him and found out about the new power-assisted exoskeleton, he said. Walmsley said, those few patients who can afford it built a bit of an evidence base so that it can be used by the masses. Disabled households need approximately £1,000 more than non-disabled households per month to achieve the same standard of living, according to the charity Scope. Scope says the gap is rising year on year. Frustrated and debilitating, founder of the charity Action Cerebral Palsy, Amanda Richardson said, barriers to accessing affordable technology and experts can create anxiety for families. Children with cerebral palsy are one of the groups that wait the longest for referral and interventions, she said. We need to get the basics right. The longer they wait for help, the more frustrating and debilitating it gets. Next up, from theconversation.com, we have a pet-friendly homeless shelter pilot reduced the rate of homelessness among the people it helped in California. When homeless shelters allow people to stay with their dogs and other pets, more unhoused people become more willing to stay in a shelter. That's why my team at the University of Southern California's Homelessness Policy Research Institute learned when we evaluated California's Pet Assistance and Support Program. California's Department of Housing and Community Development established this pilot program in 2019. Its goals were straightforward: to make homeless shelters more accommodating for people with pets, mostly dogs, so that people living on the streets don't have to choose between them staying in shelters and abandoning their pets. The program dispersed US $15.75 million between 2020 and 2024 to 37 organizations across the state. The funding allowed shelters to build kennels or other pet-friendly spaces, provide pet food and supplies, and offer basic veterinary care. It also covered the cost of staffing and maintaining insurance required to operate pet-friendly shelters. Evaluating the program, we did this evaluation in collaboration with My Dog is My Home, a nonprofit that supports pet-inclusive housing and services for the homeless. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. By all accounts, the program was a success. We found that the program helped 4,407 people experience homelessness keep their pets while getting support. Many were able to enter shelters and their animals received needed veterinary care. A total of 886 people ultimately moved into permanent housing with their pets, a higher success rate than the statewide average for homeless people in California. Theoretically, this funding should have reduced the number of pet owners living on the streets. Yet, since 2019, the year of the program began, the number of homeless people in Los Angeles with dogs and other pets has increased. The number of homeless people in Los Angeles has fallen by more than 4% since 2023 to just over 72,000 people in 2025. But based on my research findings, I would expect the number of people living on the city streets with and without pets to rise over time unless a more affordable housing solution becomes available. And growth in the homeless population may be hard to avoid without more efforts like California's Pet Assistance and Support Program on a larger scale than the pilot we studied. Up next from news.mit.edu, ocean bacteria team up to break down biodegradable plastic. MIT researchers uncover the roles of bacterial species from the environment as they consume biodegradable plastic. Biodegradable plastics could help alleviate the plastic waste crisis that is polluting the environment and harming our health. But how long plastics take to degrade and how environmental bacteria work together to break them down is still largely unknown. Understanding how plastics are broken down by microbes could help scientists create more sustainable materials and even new microbial recycling systems that convert plastic waste into useful materials. Now, MIT researchers have taken an important first step towards understanding how bacteria work together to break down plastic. In a new paper, the researchers uncovered the role of individual ocean bacteria in the breakdown of a widely used biodegradable plastic. They also showed the complementary processes microbes use to fully consume the plastic, with one microbe cleaving the plastic into its component chemicals and the others consuming each chemical. The researchers say it's one of the first studies illuminating specific bacterial species' role in the breakdown of plastic and indicates the speed of plastic degradation can vary widely depending on a few key factors. There's a lot of ambiguity about how long these materials actually exist in the environment, says lead author Mark Forster, a PhD student in the MIT Who-I program. This shows plastic biodegradation is highly dependent on the microbial community where the plastic ends up. It also depends on the plastics, the chemistry of the polymer, and how they're made as a product. It's important to understand these processes because we're trying to constrain the environmental lifetime of these materials. Joining Foster on the paper are MIT PhD candidate Philip Wasson, former MIT postdoc Andrea Sichert, MIT undergraduate Deborah Madden, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute researchers Matthew Hayden and Adam Subhas, Chong Becker and Sebastian Gross of the International Chemical and Plastic BASF, Otto Cordero, an MIT Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Darcy McRose, MIT's Thomas D. and Virginia W. Cabot Career Development Professor, and Desiree Plata, MIT School of Engineering Distinguished Climate and Energy Professor. The paper appears in the journal Environmental Science and Technology. Uncovering collaboration. Scientists hope biodegradable plastic can be used to address the mountains of plastic waste piling up in our oceans and landfills. More than half of the produced plastic is either sent to landfills directly or released into the environment, Foster says. More than half the produced plastic is either sent to landfills or directly released into the environment, Foster says. But without knowing the specifics of different degradation processes, we won't be able to accurately predict the lifetime of these materials and better control that degradation. To date, many studies into the biodegradation of plastics have focused on single microbial organisms, but Foster says that's not representative of how most plastics are broken down in the environment. It's really rare for a single bacterium to carry out the full degradation process because it requires a significant metabolic burden to carry all of the enzymatic functions and depolymerize the polymer and then use those chemical subunits as a carbon and an energy source, Foster says. Other studies have sought to capture the molecular footprints of groups of bacteria as they degrade plastic, which gives a snapshot of these species involved without uncovering the mechanisms of action. For this study, the researchers wanted to uncover the roles of specific bacterial species as they fully degraded plastic. They started with a type of biodegradable plastic known as an aromatic aliphatic copolyester. Such plastic is used in shopping bags and food packaging. It is also often laid across the soil of farms to prevent weeds and retain moisture. To begin the study, researchers at BASF, which produces that type of plastic, first placed samples of the product into different depths of the Mediterranean Sea to let bacteria grow as a thin biofilm around the plastic. The company then shipped the samples to researchers at MIT who isolated as many species of bacteria as possible from the samples. The researchers mixed those isolates and identified 30 bacterial species that continued to grow in abundance on the plastic. Using carbon dioxide as a measure of plastic degradation, the researchers isolated each bacterium and found one, Pseudomonas pacastrelle, that could depolymerize the plastic compounds, breaking them into 3 chemical components of the plastic: terephthalic acid, sebacic acid, and butanediol. But that bacterium couldn't consume all 3 components on its own. One by one, the researchers exposed each bacterium to each chemical, finding no bacteria that could consume all 3, although they did find some species that could consume 1 or 2 chemicals on their own. Finally, the researchers selected 5 bacterial species based on their complementary breakdown abilities and showed the small group exhibited the same ability to fully degrade the plastic as the 30-member bacteria community. I was able to minimize the degradation process to this simplistic set of specific metabolic functions, Foster says, and then when I took out one bacterium, the mineralization dropped, which indicated the organism was controlling the degradation of the polymer. Then when I had each of the bacteria alone in a culture, none of them could reach the same degradation as all 5 together, indicating there was this complementary function required. It worked much better than I thought it would. The researchers also found the 5-member bacteria community couldn't mineralize a different plastic, showing groups of bacteria may only be able to mineralize specific plastics. It highlights that the microbes living where the plastic ends up are going to dictate the plastic's lifetime, Foster says. Foster notes the bacteria in his study are likely specific to the Mediterranean Sea. The study also only involved bacteria that could survive in his lab environment. Still, Foster says that it's one of the first papers that identifies the roles of bacteria in consuming plastic. Most studies wouldn't be able to identify the specific bacteria that's controlling each complementary mineralization process, Foster says. Here we can say that this bacteria controls degradation, these bacteria handle mineralization, and then we show the function of each bacteria and show that together they can remove the entire polymer. Foster says the work is an important first step towards creating microbial systems that are better at breaking down plastic or converting it to something useful. In follow-up work for his PhD, he is exploring what makes successful bacterial pairs for faster plastic consumption and how enzymes dock on plastic particles to initiate and continue degradation. The work was supported by the MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium, BASF-SE. Partial support was provided by the U.S. National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program. Up next, from artnews.com, National Women's History Museum announces 7-figure donation from Meryl Streep. Earlier this week, the National Women's History Museum, a nonprofit that organizes mostly virtual exhibitions that illuminate the stories of women who have shaped our past and who continue to inform our shaped future, announced that Meryl Streep made a 7-figure donation to the Washington, D.C.-based institution. According to a statement, the Academy Award-winning actor has been a longtime supporter of the National Women's History Museum, which was founded in 1996 by Karen Stazer. The museum plans to use the funds to expand its digital initiatives. The National Women's History Museum has long been a catalyst for bringing forward the stories that deepen our understanding of who we are, said Streep in a statement. I am proud to continue supporting this essential work so that future generations inherit a history that is both truthful and complete. In honor of Streep, the museum is inaugurating a new annual award to be given to an educator who advances the teaching of women's history. The first winner of the Meryl Streep Educator Award will be announced at the museum's gala this fall. Streep's latest film, a sequel to the 2006 hit The Devil Wears Prada, comes out on May 1st. She has been nominated for 21 Academy Awards and has won 3. The National Women's History Museum current initiatives include a webinar on gamifying women's history, a virtual story time for kids called Brave Girls, online panel discussions, and several events related to Women's History Month. And our next article from opb.org. Paul Allen's estate says it's begun the process of selling the Super Bowl champion Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks are going up for sale in accordance with the wishes of late team owner Paul Allen. Allen's estate announced Wednesday that it has begun the process of selling the team, which is coming off its second Super Bowl victory in franchise history. The NFL did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the Associated Press, nor did Allen's estate have anything further to add beyond its brief statement, it said. Ahead of the Super Bowl, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell commended Allen's estate on its time owning the Seahawks. They're in the Super Bowl, and I think from that standpoint, they've done a really important job in the context of the trust and the execution of that, Goodell said. But eventually the team will need to be sold in accordance with that. That will be Jody's decision for when she does that, and we will be supportive of that. Investment bank Allen & Company and law firm Latham & Watkins will lead the sales process, which is estimated to continue through the offseason. NFL owners must then ratify a final purchase agreement. The estate said the sale is consistent with Allen's directive to eventually sell his sports holdings and direct all estate proceeds to philanthropy. The Seahawks have been in the Allen family since 1997 when Paul bought the team for $194 million from then-owner Ken Behring. Paul was critical in keeping the Seahawks in Seattle, which is where the team is expected to remain after the sale is finalized. The Seahawks have a lease at Lumen Field. That runs through 2032 with 3 10-year options. That's 2062 that they could extend till without having to change anything or any new deals being made, by the way, for anyone trying to do the math. Since Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, died in 2018 from complications of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at 65, the Seahawks and NBA's Trailblazers have been owned by his sister, Jody. The estate agreed in September to sell the Trailblazers to an investment group led by Carolina Hurricanes owner Tom Dundon. The Trailblazers will remain in Portland as part of the deal, which could be completed this spring. The last NFL team to be sold was the Washington Commanders in 2023. A group led by Josh Harris that includes Magic Johnson bought the team from longtime owner Dan Snyder and his family for a record $6.05 billion. It already has been an off-season turnover for the Seahawks less than 2 weeks removed from their Super Bowl victory over the New England Patriots. The Las Vegas Raiders plucked away offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak and hired him as their head coach. The Seattle Seahawks are expected to hire San Francisco 49er tight ends coach and run game coordinator Brian Fleury as their offensive coordinator, a person with knowledge of the hiring process said Sunday, speaking to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity because a deal was still being worked on. The Seahawks roster could look quite different in 2026 too. Defensive starters, safety Kobe Bryant. Okay. Cornerbacks Josh Joby and Rick Woolen, and edge rusher Boy Maffey. See, those sound like football player names. What is this other? Wait, NFL? Hockey players. Hockey player names. What is Seattle Seahawks? Yeah, that's a hockey team. Anyways, they sound like sport player names. Kobe Bryant. What? Is that the same Kobe Bryant? Somebody fix that. Somebody in the comments figure out what's going on there. All right, thank you. Offensive standouts, wide receiver return specialist Rashid Shaheed and running back Kenneth Walker III will be unrestricted free agents in March too. Both Shaheed and Walker, who was the Super Bowl MVP, have said publicly that they would like to return to Seattle next season. Should the Seahawks sale wrap up by this offseason, though, the team will not be owned by the Allen family for the first time in nearly 3 decades. All right. From gosh.org, Gosh charity-funded team engineers first lab-grown esophagus in breakthrough for children's surgery. Groundbreaking research supported by Great Ormond Street Hospital charity, Gosh Charity, has made huge strides towards personalized regenerative treatments for children born with life-threatening esophageal conditions. Scientists from Great Ormond Street Hospital, Gosh, and University College London, UCL, have created the first lab-grown esophagus, the pipe that moves food from the throat to the stomach, and successfully transplanted it in a living animal model. A new personalized treatment. Published today in Nature Biotechnology, the researchers showed for the first time that an esophagus from a donor animal can be used as a base structure on which to grow a new section of an esophagus using a recipient animal's own cells in a process called tissue engineering. When implanted into a living animal model, the engineered esophagus tissue was able to fully integrate into the digestive system, restoring functions such as swallowing without the need to suppress their immune system. Immune suppressants are usually needed with donor tissue to prevent the recipient from rejecting the transplant. The results could be transformational for children born with long gap esophageal artesia, a rare condition where esophagus doesn't form properly and prevents food from passing to the stomach. Children born with this condition will need to undergo surgery to repair the gap in the esophagus. Surgical approaches currently include waiting for the esophagus to grow more so the ends either side of the gap can be joined together, or using tissue from another organ such as the stomach or intestine to close the gap. The surgery is complex and can cause major breathing and gastrointestinal complications. Tissue engineering would allow a replacement to be made without needing to use one of the patient's existing organs, offering a less invasive option with a better chance at restoring a long-term esophageal function. With further development, this work could result in an off-the-shelf structure that can be personalized for newborns or children with long gap esophageal artesia, restoring their ability to eat so they can continue to grow and live a healthy childhood. And from quantummagazine.org, quantum cryptography pioneers win Turing Award. One afternoon in October 1979, Gilles Brassard was swimming outside a beachfront hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico, when a stranger swam up to him and changed the course of his career. Without so much as an introduction, the man began describing a way to create currency that couldn't be forged. The scheme was based on the laws of quantum physics, a subject Brassard, a computer scientist, knew nothing about. I was trapped, so I listened politely, Brassard said. Doubt soon turned to fascination as he realized that this exotic quantum money scheme was actually serious science. That improbable meeting was the beginning of a long and fruitful collaboration between Brassard and his new acquaintance, a physicist named Charles Bennett. Their work would help launch the booming field of quantum information science, spurring the development of new technology and the discovery of fundamental connections between physics and information. Bennett and Brassard have now named the winners of the AM Turing Award, one of the highest honors in computing, for their essential role in establishing the foundations of quantum information science and transforming secure communication and computing. The award comes with a $1 million prize. Quantum information science is now home to thousands of active researchers, and until the mid-1990s, it was a small community whose insights were often dismissed by outsiders. Bennett and Broussard were among its most vocal early advocates. They helped to set the culture for this group, which was kind of on the fringes of both physics and computer science at the time, said John Priskill, quantum physicist at the California Institute of Technology. Their influence on quantum information science was massive, said Scott Aronson, a computer scientist at the University of Texas, Austin. They were there since before quantum computing was even a field. A new kind of money. It was no coincidence that Bennett and Broussard found themselves on the same Puerto Rican beach on that day nearly 50 years ago. Both were attending a conference on theoretical computer science, but the academic trajectories that had brought them there were strikingly different. Broussard had been in Montreal in 1955. He learned advanced math from his older brother while still in elementary school and started college at age 13. In 1979, when he was just 24, he received his doctorate and joined the faculty of the University of Montreal. He went to the Puerto Rican conference to present results from his graduate research on the mathematical foundations of cryptography. Bennett's journey was more circuitous. He was born in New York City in 1943. He went to college intending to study biochemistry and wound up doing graduate research at Harvard University at the intersection of chemistry and physics. But all the while, he was growing increasingly interested in finding connections between physics and computation at a time when the two subjects were considered largely unrelated. While Bennett was working towards his doctorate in the late 1960s, his friend Stephen Weisner would often visit what Bennett called his communal hippie house in Boston. On one such visit, Weisner brought a draft of a paper he'd written about a radically new application of quantum physics, a quantum money scheme with which Bennett would ambush Broussard a decade later. Weisner's idea was motivated by one of the most important requirements for any form of currency. It should be very difficult to create a convincing counterfeit banknote. It's not enough to give each bill a unique serial number if anyone can, in principle, read that number and copy it, so governments resort to sophisticated technology to thwart forgery. Weisner realized that the laws of quantum physics could offer a new solution to the problem of counterfeiters. His scheme exploited a strange feature of quantum measurement. Attempting to measure a particle can disturb it in an inherently unpredictable way, erasing all information about the state it was in before the measurement. You can avoid this disturbance with a judicious choice of measurement, but only if you already have some partial information about the particle's initial state. Each of Weisner's hypothetical quantum banknotes would contain a group of particles in different quantum states. These particles would encode the bits of a unique serial number. A would-be counterfeiter would need to measure every particle in the group without disturbing it to learn that serial number and create a duplicate. With just a few dozen particles, failure would be all but guaranteed. Quantum measuring disturbance, ordinarily a nuisance, would serve as a shield against prying eyes. In the early 1970s, Weisner abruptly abandoned physics research and joined the California counterculture, and his revolutionary paper remained unpublished for nearly 15 years. Weisner later embraced religion, moved to Israel, and became a construction worker. He died in 2021. As a Jew, I'm going to say that's probably not a tragedy. Bennett, meanwhile, eventually landed a job at IBM, where he developed a new theory of reversible computation, but he couldn't get Weisner's idea out of his mind. He tried to interest other researchers for a decade, to no avail, until he met Broussard in Puerto Rico. As they bobbed into the waves on that fateful day, Broussard pointed out a glaring problem with the quantum money scheme. It would be impossible to counterfeit banknotes, but it would also be difficult to use them, since the only person who created a bill would be able to check that it was valid. Broussard suggested that it may be possible to patch this problem by combining Weisner's scheme with techniques from cryptography. By the time the duo returned to the shore 10 minutes later, they had settled on key ideas that would become their first joint paper. After that initial encounter, Bennett and Broussard would visit each other occasionally to swap ideas. They could only afford to devote so much time to their shared interest in the obscure subject of quantum information. In those days, it was nobody's day job, Bennett said. The duo began to wonder whether they could harness quantum measurement disturbance to keep secret messages safe from eavesdroppers. Cryptographers already knew one encryption scheme that was perfectly secure in principle, but it required the sender and receiver, typically called Alice and Bob, to meet in person and choose a long string of random bits to use as a secret encryption key. What's more, they needed to use a separate key for each new message. These restrictions were too cumbersome for most applications. More practical encryption schemes avoided the need for in-person meetings, but relied on unproven assumptions about the difficulty of certain math problems. In 1983, Bennett and Broussard devised a new quantum approach to private communication. In their scheme, now known as BB-84, Alice and Bob would establish a shared secret by sending and measuring photons, the quantum particles that constitute light, without ever needing to meet in person. They could then use that key to encrypt a message. The method, again, made use of quantum measurement disturbance. Any eavesdropper who tried to snoop on the quantum transmissions would disrupt them, learning nothing and alerting Alice and Bob to their presence. It also would rely on mathematical assumptions. Not even an eavesdropper who could mathematically solve the world's hardest math problems would learn the secret key. Teleporting forward, Bennett and Broussard's quantum key distribution paper would become one of the most famous works in quantum information science, but at that time, few took notice, so the duo eventually decided to build an experimental demonstration. I wanted to show that it was possible, that it was not just nonsense from a theoretician, Broussard said. With no budget and little experience in experimental physics, Bennett and Broussard's team had to improvise. At one point, Bennett and his colleague John Simolian brought a sheet of black velvet from a fabric store to block out stray light. Telling the confused shop clerk that they needed it for quantum cryptography, Bennett later repurposed the velvet for a hat. They finally got the experiment working in October 1989, 10 years to the day after Bennett and Broussard's first meeting in Puerto Rico. Their apparatus demonstrated quantum key distribution across a distance of 30 centimeters. More recent demonstrations using satellite links have implemented the method over more than 1,000 kilometers. In 1993, Bennett, Broussard, and 4 other researchers published another iconic paper that showed how to use a bizarre quantum phenomenon called entanglement. You saying quantum entanglement is the thing people won't know if you just say it, but you keep saying quantum distribution and quantum disturbance, like those are common expressions. Who wrote this paper? Who is this journalist? Anyways, moving on. To teleport the state of one quantum particle onto another. Though the name calls to mind Captain Kirk getting beamed up to the Enterprise, quantum teleportation transmits only information, not matter. Oh my god, this person. Anyways, it was one of the first examples of how entanglement could serve as a resource for information processing. Okay, I can't laugh. By that point, quantum information science was attracting a bit of a buzz. It really took off a year later. Digital encryption often relies on the assumption that it's hard for a computer to break a large number of its prime factors. But in 1994, the applied mathematician Peter Shor devised a quantum algorithm that could quickly do just that. Shor's milestone discovery underscored the importance of quantum encryption methods that didn't require assumptions about mathematical difficulty. Shor's algorithm, right. No, definitely no one knows what Shor's algorithm is. Shor's algorithm made our idea unavoidable, Broussard said. In the 30 years since Shor's discovery, interest and investment in quantum information science have skyrocketed. Researchers have raced to build powerful quantum computers and identified connections to seemingly unrelated topics in fundamental physics. There's also been a surge of new interest in quantum cryptography. Until a few years ago, researchers believed that quantum tricks were only useful for a few special cryptographic tasks like a key distribution. But a recent line of work has offered tantalizing hints that the scope of quantum cryptography might be much broader. Bennett and Broussard have followed these new developments with interest. That's a very fascinating idea, Bennett said. It might be a way where there's a quantum rescue from the quantum disaster of Shor's algorithm. Yeah, like, he can't make that joke if Shor's algorithm is not something a lot of people in these fields and out of these fields will know. I don't know who this reporter is, but read a book. And our next article from e360.yale.edu. In hunt for rare earths, companies are scouring mining waste. Over many decades, coal mining in West Virginia has exposed sulfur-bearing rocks to oxygen, creating a widespread problem that continues to plague the region, the draining of highly acidic water into streams and creeks, which are then rendered lifeless. But a relatively new process developed by researchers at West Virginia University and Virginia Tech is providing hope for some waters plagued by acid mine drainage. The method, which captures the rare earths liberated by the fugitive sulfuric acid, not only cleans the streams, but also generates revenue to pay for the cleanup and provides a sustainable source of the critical metals needed to manufacture electrical vehicles, wind turbines, and other technologies propelling the global transmission from fossil fuels. 3 pilot facilities in West Virginia are each currently producing 4 to 5 tons of rare earth oxides a year. A larger facility is under construction at the enormous Berkeley Pit, shuttered open pit copper mine in Butte, Montana, where a company aims to produce 40 tons of rare earths a year from the pit's billions of gallons of toxic wastewater. Combined with the output of other planned re-mining operations, such efforts, experts say, could obviate the need for new mines. Experts say a significant portion of the nation's strategic minerals could come from processing tailings and other waste. The reclamation process is fairly simple. Sludge collected from the mining waste is placed in densely woven bags, and the water percolates out, leaving a high-purity pre-concentrate that is further refined using solvents. Because the system requires no rock grinding or intensive processing, its carbon footprint is about half that of conventional mining and milling operations, according to Paul F. Zymkowicz, former director of West Virginia University's Water Research Institute. The concept of remining legacy and banning sites is gaining traction around the world as mining companies aim to provide their environmental practices under pressure from investors and from manufacturers who want sustainable minerals. Interest is also driven by companies and governments scrambling to procure the 17 minerals known as rare earth elements, REE, in addition to other strategic and critical metals, including copper, which the U.S. Department of the Interior added to its list of critical minerals last year. The race is heated because these commodities have become geopolitical assets, central to nations seeking dominance in artificial intelligence and computing technologies. It's estimated that more than 200 hyperscale data centers are under construction or proposed in the U.S. alone, and each one requires up to 50,000 metric tons of copper. Last year, President Donald Trump signed an executive order and declared a national energy emergency to speed permitting and short-circuiting environmental review of mining and remining projects. Experts say a significant portion of the nation's strategic minerals could come from processing the tailings of other waste left behind in the 19th and 20th centuries, when metals processing was much more primitive and environmental standards were lax and non-existent. A recent study by the Colorado School of Mines found that recovering 90% of existing byproducts could supply almost the entirety of U.S. critical mineral needs. Policies and technological advancements can enable byproduct recovery, which is a resource-efficient approach to critical mineral supply that reduces waste, impact, and geopolitical risk, the authors wrote. The mineral is already pre-ground, and that saves a lot of water and energy, said Ann Maist, an aqueous geochemist with a Colorado consulting firm and the author of a recent peer-reviewed study of remining funded by Earth Justice. In that sense, I'm a cheerleader for the remining. If it's done well and you monitor the water quality and soil quality before and after you mine, you can show you made an improvement. That's great. But for all its promise, remining also has potential to create new problems as companies remove and stir up tailings and other waste that has been dormant for decades or longer. Remining is mining. Current laws do not go far enough to stop dangerous mining practices, and Aaron Mintz, Senior Policy Counsel for Earthworks, an environmental NGO that published a 2024 report on the processing of mining waste, we need updated mining laws and mining rules. The statute that governs public lands mining is from 1872. All right, and for our next and last, final article of the week from theguardian.com, we have mining made this U.S. tribal area a toxic wasteland. This indigenous nation brought it back to life. The Quapaw Nation is the only U.S. native community to carry out a cleanup of one of the country's worst sites of environmental contamination. They call this land the Lawe. In the late 1800s, part of these 200 acres of grassland inside the Quapaw Nation were allotted to tribal citizen Charlie Quapaw Blackhawk. After forcing dozens of tribes into Indian territory before the Civil War, the U.S. government then parceled out reservations and property to individual members. It was part of the government's attempt to civilize Native Americans by turning them into private, non-communal landholders and yeoman farmers in the model of Thomas Jefferson's ideal citizen. Yet, for the last century, little grew on the Lawe. Half of it was buried beneath towering mounds of toxic rock known as chat piles. The waste rock, laced with chemicals, was left after miners extracted millions of tons of lead and zinc from the tri-state mining district. This article seems oddly familiar. I'm hearing some things I might have heard very, very, very recently. Pretty recently. Where the valuable ores stretched across Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma between 1891 and the 1970s. That's also post the last time they did mineral law updates. Interesting how these news articles are lining up. I don't know if anybody notices some patterns. By 1983, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, had designated 40 square miles that include nearly all the Quapaw Nation as the Tar Creek Superfund site, joining the EPA's list of the most contaminated places in the country, formerly called a mega site. Tar Creek remains one of the largest and most complex environmental disasters in the country. After years of cleanup, the lawway has been cleared of chat. The ground has been restored and tested. The soil is healthy again. Like hundreds of acres across the Quapaw Nation, it has returned to agriculture. And the Quapaw, a community with more than 6,000 members, have led this revitalization themselves as the first and only tribal nation in the country to manage and carry out a Superfund cleanup. By cleaning contaminated ground, a slow process that began 40 years ago and will likely continue for decades, the tribe can expand its farming efforts and food protection on its own terms. I wonder what the color of the skin of the people who did the mining was. Just a thought. A new sense of identity and independence. Last spring, the Lawe, a common surname in the area, was covered in green fields of oats 2 feet high. The Quapaw agricultural offices used the pasture to rotate a herd of about 400 cattle. Larry Kropp, a rancher and Quapaw citizen in his late 70s, grew up down the road from the lawway. As a boy, he was warned to avoid open mine shafts. In winter, he sledded down the chat piles that covered the fields. It makes him happy to see the land finally cleared and used to feed cattle. He can also imagine what this place was like when the Quapaw arrived. They talk about the waves of grass and compare them to the ocean. I would like to see that one of these days, he said. Agriculture is the main business of this rural corner of northeast Oklahoma. Cattle and row crops, corn and soybeans are generating more revenue. The Quapaw expect the nation's agricultural division to turn a profit, as they do with casinos, resorts, and convenience stores. The bison herd surrounding the tribe's downstream casino resort, however, is both sustenance and symbol. The greenhouses and gardens of the tribe's food sovereignty division raise tomatoes, cucumbers, and also traditional medicines. The Quapaw meat processing plant, the first opened by a tribe, is a business that also ensures a steady supply of protein to the tribe. The Quapaw agriculture means identity and independence. In the mid-1600s, one of the first Europeans to encounter the Quapaw, who were then living in what is now eastern Arkansas, reported miles of fields planted with beans, plums, pumpkins, sunflowers, peaches, and grapes. Corn was the tribe's staple crop. Men hunted, women tended crops, and both played roles in tribal politics, as was typical for tribes in the Mississippi Valley. As historian Kathleen Duval noted in her book, The Native Ground, that gendered division of labor vexed the Anglo-American settlers who were unable to get over their agrarian sexism and notion that farming and leadership were men's business. To be truly civilized, Duval writes, Quapaw men would have to become farmers. In 1891, a more lucrative use for the land emerged with the discovery of one of the world's richest deposits of lead and zinc. The Tri-State Mining District produced 1.7 million tons of lead and 8.8 million tons of zinc, more than 75% of the bullets and shells fired by the United States in the First and Second World Wars contained minerals from the region. The town of Pitcher, inside the Quapaw Reservation, was at the center of the area's most productive minefield, but only a small portion of Quapaw families benefited from the boom. Blackhawk leased his allotment for $10 and a royalty of 5% of the minerals mined. The U.S. Supreme Court later ruled that the arrangement violated protections imposed on Indian land. When the mining ended in the 1970s, deep scars remained. Chat piles, some spreading nearly 100 acres, contained lead and cadmium. They smothered the ground and leached toxins when it rained. The 300 miles of tunnels below the surface were often collapsed, swallowing cattle, cars, and even homes. The largest cave-in covered nearly 4 acres. In 1979, acidic water from the mines reached the surface, and Tar Creek turned rusty orange. Land that had once been abundant was now practically dead, and there were other long-term effects. A 1994 study found that 34% of Native American children in the area had dangerously high levels of lead in their blood. Quapaw take control. The contractors stopped the cleanup when federal grant money ran out, leaving sites half cleared. Boulders were left scattered about, making it difficult to drive tractors across the fields. Other contractors were paid by the pound. They scraped off the chat and good topsoil needed for farming. Chris Roper, who at the time was the tribe's director of construction and agriculture, remembered. The tribe said, "You are no longer welcome on Quapaw land. Get your stuff and get off our reservation." The tribe took control. The tribal chair told Roper to handle the cleanup. Roper rented a bulldozer, hired a tribal heavy equipment operator, and got to work. We started clearing up the land. We found topsoil to dress the land back up. We seeded, we mulched it, we tallied our expenses, and sent a bill to the EPA, he said. After the Quapaw took over, they focused on making the acreage productive again. They brought in mushroom compost to restore the earth. Once the contaminated land had been cleaned to EPA standards, row crops could be grown safely. Cattle could graze on remediated land if they rotated the livestock so the animals would not eat the grasses down to the ground and ingest contaminated soil. And even land not suitable for crops grazing could be set aside for wildlife. The EPA eventually paid the tribe the thousands of dollars it spent for the work. In 2013, the tribe was officially awarded a $2 million EPA contract for the next cleanup project, a site called the Catholic 40, renamed after a religious boarding for Quapaw children that once operated on the 40-acre site. Since then, the tribe has handled all the remediation of the Tarkreet chat piles, using their own equipment and their own employees to carry away the rock. The larger stone is sold for road work, where asphalt safely contains the lead. Most of the rest is dumped at a repository. Wait, they just put lead in the roads? Do they have any standards in that country? Where the growing mound will eventually be safely encased in clean soil. The work has generated almost 100 jobs, and almost half of the employees are Quapaw citizens. We learned as we went, and obviously the EPA did too. Roper said, "We didn't want to ever leave a site where it was just a wasteland. If you take all the trees off, all the topsoil off, and nothing can grow, that's not benefiting anyone." And that is the end of this week's articles. Hopefully they added a little positive joy to your life. Before we end, I have our final segment of the show, something I like to call A Tale of Two Paragraphs. In this segment, I take the first and last paragraph from an article on Substack or another similar source and read them to you, to encourage you to go read the article yourself. Many people forget the power of the written word to move us and how intriguing the middle of the story is. The less I read, the better, but people often want to know how we got to endings more than the endings themselves, and maybe you will go exploring the Substack and read the paragraphs in between. This week's article is from Substack entitled Why I Can't Retire and comes from Robert Reich. His paragraphs are too short here to do literally 2 paragraphs, so it's whatever I wanted for this week. Sue me. Friends, yesterday I heard from an old friend who urged me to slow down. "You're overdoing it, Bob," he said. "A new book, movie, Substack, videos. You're pushing 80. For crying out loud, what are you trying to prove?" I told him I'm not trying to prove anything. He warned me I was going to harm my health. Rubbish. I'm not going to go play golf or lie in a hammock and sip mint juleps. That's not me. A bit more around the middle and an ending of fuck retirement. I do all of this because I believe in you. I believe in your values, in your thoughtfulness, in your determination to leave this nation and this world a better place than they were before Trump. I believe that together we will get through this and we will prevail. We hope you enjoyed our show, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so I won't. Have a good day. And if you haven't turned off now, you get to hear an announcement that there is going to be a new weekly segment on Fridays. We're moving to Monday shows, Friday segments, and a monthly one on a specific person, starting with Princess Diana. And then the other 3 for each month are going to be old news from previously in history. So new segments coming. If you stayed a little past the end, good for you for getting the announcement. Thank you.